If you've been navigating the modern dating world at all in the last, say, decade, it can feel less like romance and more like,
Oh,
well, like an anthropological study of some really bizarre, unpredictable behaviors.
that's a perfect way to put it. The entire landscape shifted, really. With mobile dating apps and instant communication, it's fundamentally altered how we connect.
And maybe more importantly, how we disconnect.
That's absolutely right. We're operating in this sort of hybrid relational ecology now, where technology gives us these incredibly sophisticated tools to both start something and to end it with almost zero accountability.
And that has birthed this whole new and often pretty painful vocabulary, a language to describe these strategies of emotional avoidance and sometimes manipulation.
Exactly.
So the listeners shared some fascinating and, I have to say, very robust research with us. Studies that detail the psychological fallout of these digital tactics.
Mm-hmm.
So today, our mission is to move beyond just defining the buzzwords, ghosting, breadcrumbing, love bombing. We're going to do a true deep dive into the scientific findings.
And we're really going to focus on the surprising differences in the psychological damage these behaviors cause, and, more importantly, the specific mechanisms, the neurochemistry, the cognitive traps that are actually at play.
It feels crucial that we establish some clarity here because these terms, these tactics, they aren't just modern annoyances, are they?
No, not at all. They represent real, measurable patterns that can seriously undermine emotional safety and trust. By understanding the psychology behind them, you can recognize these red flags faster, you can protect your emotional bandwidth, and ultimately you can prioritize relationships built on consistency and respect.
Okay, so let's unpack this environment we're all in. The sheer design of modern dating apps with that constant, endless stream of potential profiles, it just naturally fosters this sense of disposability.
It does. When you look at the economics and the interface design of these apps, you realize they are optimized for perpetual browsing, not really for committed connection.
They've effectively gamified relationships.
Completely.
Yeah.
When a platform is processing hundreds of millions of interactions every single day, it just incentivizes low accountability. I mean, why bother with the discomfort of a rejection conversation when the next profile is just a swipe away?
It creates a culture of instant gratification, right?
Yeah.
And that's coupled with these really short attention spans, which makes those unhealthy digital tactics the easy way out.
The path of least resistance. Precisely. We have this diverse digital toolkit to manage or end relationships, and more people are choosing the tool that minimizes their own momentary discomfort, no matter the emotional price the other person pays.
So let's make sure we have crystal clear definitions for the three core behaviors that the research talks about. Ghosting, breadcrumbing, and love bombing. Starting with the most widespread one, ghosting.
So ghosting is a relationship dissolution strategy. It's characterized by the abrupt and unilateral cessation of all communication.
Texts, phone calls, social media.
Everything.
Everything. It happens without any explanation, no closure. The interaction just stops. Silence becomes the answer. And the power of it, I think, lies in the vacuum it creates. The person just vanishes, and it leaves the other person adrift, forced to manage this complete uncertainty about what they did wrong.
And this is not a rare thing. The data shows the prevalence is significant. Studies in the U.S. show that anywhere from, 13 to 23% of adults report being ghosted by a romantic partner.
And the key Spanish study we're going to be digging into, that's Navarro and his colleagues from 2020, found that 19.3% of their adult sample had experienced ghosting in the past year.
So it's become a widely accepted, though obviously very painful, modern norm.
Okay, so next, let's move to the tactic that the research shows is often, and this is surprising, far more insidious: breadcrumbing.
Breadcrumbing. It's defined by sending these flirtatious, non-committal, and very sporadic social signals, the crumbs, just frequently enough to keep the other person interested, but never, ever enough to allow the relationship to actually progress.
It's an act of emotional rationing.
That's a great way to put it.
So if ghosting is, pulling the plug entirely, breadcrumbing is keeping the plug half in, so the light just flickers enough to draw power.
That's an excellent way to conceptualize it. The breadcrumber gets an ego boost. They validate their own attractiveness, and they keep a potential partner on hold or in reserve with just minimal effort and absolutely no intention of commitment.
So they avoid letting the connection die for good. They just want to stay relevant in the periphery of your life.
Exactly.
And finally, there's love bombing, which, based on the name, it doesn't sound harmful at all, but it's often the most calculated and, frankly, dangerous of these strategies.
Right. Love bombing is this intense, very early deluge of excessive affection, attention, flattery, and sometimes expensive gifts. It's manipulative. It's deployed specifically to overwhelm the target, to quickly gain their trust, and to increase their dependence on the perpetrator.
It feels like the ultimate whirlwind romance, right? You meet someone, and within days, they're saying things like, "You are the one I've been searching for," or "We are soulmates."
Precisely. But the key distinction is that genuine, deep connection that takes time. It builds steadily. Love bombing tries to fast-track intimacy to establish control. It's a performance. It's designed to bypass your natural boundary-setting instincts.
And it's often attributed to individuals who score high on those dark triad traits, right? Narcissism, psychopathy.
Machiavellianism, exactly. It's not intimacy. It's inoculation.
These three core behaviors, ghosting, breadcrumbing, and love bombing, they really form the foundation. But the complexity of digital avoidance has birthed this entire sophisticated glossary of terms.
It really has. These terms illustrate all the different shades of gray that digital communication allows for.
So let's start with the less abrupt ways of ending things. We have fizzling, or sometimes it's called slow fading.
Fizzling is that gradual decline of interest in communication until the relationship just sort of fades away. Unlike ghosting, where communication just stops dead, fizzling is a gentle deceleration.
But it still avoids confrontation. And it still lacks that formal closure, leaving you with this sense of, wait, did that ever even start?
Right. And then on the more dramatic side of avoidance, you have cloaking.
Cloaking sounds harsh.
It is harsh. It's when someone not only fails to show up for a planned date, a total no-show, but then they immediately block you on all communication platforms. It's ghosting combined with a direct act of physical avoidance. Total digital and physical obliteration.
Then there's the post-breakup digital lurking, which includes orbiting.
Orbiting is fascinating because it happens after a connection has already ended, often through ghosting or a slow fade. The person avoids direct contact, so no texts, no calls, but they stay in your digital orbit.
How?
By viewing your stories, liking your photos, or leaving these sporadic, non-committal reactions, they want to maintain visibility without any accountability.
It's a way for them to feed their ego, I guess, by seeing you're still engaged with their online presence. Or maybe just to keep the door slightly ajar for a future return.
And if that door is fully re-entered, that's when you get zombied, or some people call it submarining.
Right. So the zombied person suddenly resurfaces after ghosting you, acting as if the disappearance never happened. That casual, "Hey stranger, how have you been?" text.
Yes. It's them testing the waters to see if you're still available for emotional mining. It forces you to manage their complete rewrite of reality.
And we mentioned future faking being tied to love bombing. This term describes the construction of this beautiful shared mirage.
Future faking involves talking extensively and enthusiastically about these huge joint dreams. We should get married and buy a house in Portugal, or we'll travel the world together. It's all designed to secure your emotional commitment and create rapid attachment, knowing full well they have no intention of ever following through.
It's a calculated lie used as a relationship adhesive.
Exactly. And finally, a less severe but still dishonest form of digital behavior, kitten fishing.
Kitten fishing, so it's not quite catfishing.
No, it sits on the spectrum just below full-blown catfishing. It involves subtle deceit in an online profile, using 5-year-old photos, maybe exaggerating their job title, or being purposefully vague about important personal details.
So they're creating a mildly improved digital self that doesn't quite match reality.
They're relying on hope rather than integrity.
Understanding this whole complex lexicon is absolutely necessary, isn't it?
Yeah.
It allows you to step back from the confusion of personal rejection and to recognize the pattern. And that's the first step toward reclaiming your agency.
These are not isolated incidents, they are strategies.
Okay, this is where we shift from definitions to data, and where the evidence presents a really significant challenge to our common assumptions. I think most people would naturally assume that the most painful, immediate, total cutoff ghosting must be the most damaging psychologically.
But the research suggests otherwise.
So the central evidence guiding this discussion is that 2020 study by Navarro, Larraz, and Gomez. It's a preliminary but really comprehensive piece of research published in Computers in Human Behavior.
And it used an online survey with 626 adults in Spain, aged 18 to 40, aiming to measure the differential psychological impact of these digital tactics.
Okay, so for the listener, let's clarify the methodology here. What exactly were they measuring?
They focused on three key psychological constructs that are known to be linked to social ostracism and relational instability. They measured satisfaction with life, which is a measure of general well-being, loneliness, specifically self-perceived social isolation, and helplessness, that feeling of lacking control over your own life or outcomes.
And they categorized participants into 4 groups based on their experiences in the past year. Those who weren't involved, those who only experienced ghosting, only experienced breadcrumbing, and then a group that experienced a combination of both.
Correct. And the researchers used standardized scales, like the satisfaction with life scale, to quantify these experiences rigorously. So they weren't just taking anecdotal reports, they were applying clinical psychological metrics.
Okay, now for the core, unexpected finding that we promised to unpack. What did the multiple regression models reveal when they compared these groups?
The most salient finding, really the headline, was that participants reporting experiences of breadcrumbing, or the combined forms of both, reported significantly lower scores on the satisfaction with life scale.
And higher scores for helplessness and loneliness.
Significantly higher, they were demonstrably suffering more.
But the true shock lies in the group that only experienced ghosting.
Yes. The statistical analysis showed no significant relation found between ghosting alone and any of the three psychological correlates they examined: satisfaction with life, helplessness, or loneliness. This really contradicts the initial hypothesis that expected both ghosting and breadcrumbing to produce similarly negative outcomes.
Wait, okay, I have to challenge that for a moment. If other studies suggest that ghosting activates the same brain regions as physical pain, how can the Navarro study conclude it has no significant relation to loneliness or life dissatisfaction? Isn't that a major contradiction we need to address?
That's a critical question, and it speaks directly to the context. The researchers acknowledged that ghosting is a blunt instrument. It causes acute pain. That physical sensation of rejection is very real. However, this study specifically measured chronic outcomes: overall life satisfaction and sustained loneliness and helplessness.
So ghosting delivers an immediate severe punch, but it is finite.
Exactly. The sudden painful end allows the brain to begin processing the loss relatively quickly, even if the closure is messy, whereas breadcrumbing creates a chronic low-grade stressor.
So the distress after a breakup is generally lower in short-term relationships, and the data suggests ghosting is much more common in those low-commitment environments.
Right. And because ghosting provides that finality, victims are able to reach the discard stage and begin their recovery faster. This leads to less correlation with long-term metrics like general life satisfaction. The pain is severe, but it's localized.
And the combined victims group, the ones who endured both breadcrumbing and then ghosting, they reported the worst scores across all 3 constructs. That suggests that experiencing the chaos of the intermittent reinforcement before the final rejection is the most devastating combination.
Well, that combination ensures the victim is maximally vulnerable and already addicted to the dynamic when the final ghosting occurs. It makes the withdrawal so much harder.
It's worth noting the prevalence of these tactics in their standard sample as well.
Yes, in that specific sample of victims, breadcrumbing was the most common form of victimization at 14.1%, which is significantly higher than the ghosting-only rate of 4.8%. The combined group was just 2.4%.
And they also saw a key demographic finding, right?
They did. Single participants reported experiencing significantly more breadcrumbing than those who were coupled, which suggests this tactic is most often deployed when individuals are actively cycling through non-exclusive connections.
Okay, before we move entirely to the mechanism behind all this, let's quickly explore the ghoster's perspective. If ghosting is so painful, why is it the preferred choice for dissolution for almost 1 in 5 adults?
Well, it rarely stems from malice. The primary driver is conflict avoidance and, frankly, emotional immaturity. Ending a relationship, even a casual one, requires an uncomfortable conversation, which triggers anxiety. Ghosting is just perceived as the ultimate convenience.
The path of least resistance.
Exactly. It prioritizes the ghoster's comfort over the recipient's well-being.
So they are literally just avoiding 30 seconds of discomfort.
Pretty much. And this avoidance is often compounded by cognitive dissonance. To justify the hurtful action, ghosters will often convince themselves that no explanation is less painful for the other person than an explicit rejection.
So they cloak their avoidance in this self-proclaimed kindness. They believe they're saving the recipient pain, when really they're just saving themselves effort.
It's textbook poor self-regulation,
Yeah.
and we also see clear links to attachment styles. Individuals with an avoidant attachment style find intimacy threatening. So as a relationship potentially deepens, They flee. Ghosting serves as a perfect, quick, and emotionally sterile strategy to preserve that distance and their emotional safety.
And on the other side, anxious attachment types might also ghost.
Yes, preemptively, to avoid the anticipated pain of being rejected themselves.
And we have to acknowledge the safety factor. For many people, particularly women on dating apps, direct rejection can carry a genuine risk of aggressive or even abusive responses.
That is a critical nuance. In cases where the other person has shown aggression or if an individual fears verbal harassment or stalking, ghosting can transition from an immature tactic into a necessary safety strategy. This is less about relational integrity and more about self-preservation.
That context is vital. The Navarro study highlights that ghosting is strongly correlated with using online dating sites, which suggests it's a strategy optimized for low-commitment, high-volume environments.
That correlation is key. Ghosting is the norm in environments where the level of commitment is inherently low. It's the psychological difference between, say, a sprained ankle, which is ghosting in a short-term fling, and a chronic debilitating condition, which is breadcrumbing.
The data has spoken. Breadcrumbing causes greater, more sustained psychological damage than ghosting alone. So now we have to analyze the mechanism. Why is being strung along in a state of perpetual hope so devastating to our mental and emotional health?
This is where we dive into true behavioral science, specifically B.F. Skinner's work on intermittent reinforcement. This concept is the psychological core of breadcrumbing. It explains exactly why this behavior creates an emotional addiction.
Okay, so remind us of the mechanism of intermittent reinforcement, or IR.
IR refers to a schedule where rewards are given sporadically and unpredictably rather than consistently. In controlled environments, Skinner showed that behavior reinforced this way is the hardest to extinguish.
Right. If a reward is consistent and then it stops, the subject learns pretty quickly the behavior is futile.
But if the reward is random, the subject continues the behavior indefinitely, driven by the hope that the reward will eventually reappear.
And applied to the digital world, the reward is the breadcrumb. That random text, the unexpected Instagram like, the vague promise of a future date.
Precisely. When the recipient, after days of agonizing silence, receives that crumb, their brain doesn't just register pleasure, it receives a powerful jolt of dopamine.
And dopamine isn't the pleasure chemical, it's the seeking chemical.
Exactly. It drives motivation and anticipation. That sporadic hit of validation encourages the recipient to continually invest energy and chase that validation, hoping that this time the sporadic reward will finally solidify into consistency.
So the breadcrumbing situation effectively turns the victim's relational efforts into a high-stakes emotional slot machine. You invest attention and hope, and occasionally you get a small, unpredictable payoff that keeps you locked into the game.
And critically, the anticipation of the uncertain reward triggers a larger dopamine response than a guaranteed reward. The unpredictability is what creates the addiction. The recipient's system becomes wired for anxiety and hope. They're trapped in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for the next positive cue from the breadcrumber.
This chronic state of uncertainty must have significant impacts on stress hormones, too.
Absolutely. When a person is constantly waiting for an unpredictable outcome, their body enters a low-grade state of fight or flight. They experience elevated cortisol and adrenaline levels. Ghosting might give you a massive acute spike of cortisol when it happens, but breadcrumbing keeps that cortisol tap dripping slowly but perpetually.
And that chronic stress, linked to the sustained state of helplessness, is what erodes overall life satisfaction and mental health, just like the Navarro study found.
Exactly.
And this chronic confusion often feeds into self-doubt and cognitive biases. The recipient must be actively finding ways to justify the inconsistency.
That brings in two major cognitive traps: confirmation bias and the sunk cost fallacy. Confirmation bias causes the victim to focus only on the breadcrumbs, that one positive text, and to filter out all the days of silence. They see the sporadic attention as proof that the person still cares.
They turn into that romantic detective we mentioned earlier.
Yes, and the sunk cost fallacy ensures they keep trying. They think, I've already invested 3 months of emotional energy, I can't quit now. If I just try a little harder, I'll get the full payoff. The investment itself becomes the reason to continue, even when the relationship clearly offers minimal return.
So ghosting forces closure, even if it's painful, which allows the nervous system to calm down. But breadcrumbing prevents the victim from processing the loss because the possibility of the relationship progressing is never fully extinguished.
The victim is perpetually prevented from moving on. They are held in this holding pattern of hope, confusion, and anxiety. And this is why the psychological correlates, The low satisfaction, the high helplessness are so much more severe. They have no control, they're addicted to a sporadic reward, and their rational mind is constantly being overridden by that seeking mechanism in the brain.
This dynamic seems uniquely suited to exploiting certain attachment styles.
So it is a textbook pairing. The breadcrumber often possesses an avoidant attachment style. They get the ego gratification of being pursued and desired, which confirms their attractiveness, while the breadcrumbs ensure the recipient remains at a safe emotional distance, preventing the intimacy they fear.
And the recipient is frequently someone with an anxious attachment style.
Exactly. Anxious types are wired to overinterpret subtle cues and are desperate for reassurance. The breadcrumbs, even if they're tiny and ambiguous, are massively magnified as proof of potential closeness. They're conditioned to believe they have to earn consistency, which feeds into the perpetrator's avoidant needs perfectly, trapping both of them in this unhealthy feedback loop.
The avoidant person runs, and the anxious person chases the inconsistent signal.
Precisely.
So if breadcrumbing represents this chronic, sustained chaos, love bombing is the intense, explosive setup that makes all that chaos possible. We often see love bombing as the launch sequence for highly manipulative or narcissistic relationships.
Love bombing is a deliberate tactic. It's often employed by individuals who are high in narcissistic traits, and it's designed to rapidly destabilize the target's boundaries and gain swift emotional dependence and control. It's an intoxicating but completely artificial form of idealization.
How does that idealization phase typically manifest?
It's a rapid-fire effort to prove soulmate status. This includes constant, overwhelming texts, sometimes dozens a day, extravagant, often premature gifts, and immediate, extreme flattery.
So they're declaring love and destiny very early on, using phrases like, "I've never met anyone like you," or "I feel like I've known you forever."
And this phase often heavily incorporates future faking.
Right, the future faking, all those grand plans, is essentially the bait on the hook.
It is. It's the promise of certainty used to distract from the current lack of foundation. The purpose of this overwhelming intensity is to override the target's internal alarm system. The target thinks, wow, this feels too fast, but they must be genuine because they're so intense.
And that allows the manipulator to quickly gather crucial personal information and establish themselves as the target's primary emotional resource. But that intensity cannot, by definition, be sustained by the manipulator because it's not authentic connection. It's a performance. So what happens when the idealization phase ends?
The mask slips, and you enter the devaluation phase. The affection is withdrawn and replaced by criticism, by boundary pushing, and by intense, confusing inconsistency, often including breadcrumbing behavior.
So the manipulator might start criticizing the victim's appearance, or their friends, or their interests, creating an environment where the victim feels they have to constantly work to win back the affection they experienced during the love bombing phase.
The goal of devaluation is control. To systematically dismantle the victim's self-esteem and make them dependent on the manipulator for their emotional regulation. The manipulator is trying to train the victim to accept less and less while always hoping for the return of that original intense high.
Which creates a state of severe internal confusion. Why is the person who told me I was perfect now telling me I'm flawed?
Exactly. And finally, the third stage is the inevitable discard.
The discard is the abrupt termination. It's often cold, swift, and frequently executed via ghosting when the partner no longer provides the necessary attention, validation, or compliance.
And because the manipulator has fast-tracked the relationship and already gathered new targets quickly, they simply move on without remorse, restarting that idealization cycle with someone new.
This cycling between the intense high of idealization and the crushing low of devaluation is the exact mechanism that fosters something far more damaging than simple heartbreak. The trauma bond.
A trauma bond is an unhealthy, powerful, and persistent attachment that forms in the presence of an abuse and reconciliation cycle. It is the emotional and neurological wiring that results from intermittent negative reinforcement coupled with sporadic positive reinforcement.
Can you tell us about the biological wiring of this bond?
Well, when the abuser is devaluing, criticizing, or disappearing, the victim is in acute distress. They're experiencing fear and abandonment. This floods their system with stress hormones. Then when the abuser suddenly returns, even with a minimal, "I miss you" text, the cessation of that pain is misinterpreted as a profoundly positive event.
So the brain experiences this rush of relief and dopamine, a kind of survival high.
It does. The brain registers the end of the pain as the reward, not recognizing it as manipulation. The system becomes conditioned to prioritize the abuser because the abuser is also the only source of relief from the abuse they're causing.
So the victim becomes addicted to chasing that initial idealized high and the subsequent relief of the pain stopping.
Right. And for individuals with a history of complex trauma or emotional neglect, this high intensity, inconsistent pattern can feel confusingly familiar. They mistake chaos for passion, and that familiarity feels incorrectly like emotional home.
That is a powerful distinction. Recognizing that the pit in your stomach when a manipulator pulls away isn't necessarily love, but rather your body recognizing a familiar, unsafe pattern from a previous relational history.
Healing requires recognizing that intensity is not depth, and that safety is the true measure of love. A trauma bond holds you captive to the pattern, demanding you constantly apologize or shrink or change yourself just to get a brief taste of the warmth you remember from the love bombing phase.
So the love bombing and breadcrumbing combination is therefore often the clearest sign that you are entering a profoundly toxic dynamic designed to exploit your vulnerabilities using intermittent reinforcement as the addictive lever.
Absolutely.
Moving from pattern recognition to self-protection requires not just recognizing the red flags out there, but cultivating resilience and integrity within ourselves. The immediate psychological tendency for any victim of ghosting or breadcrumbing is to ruminate and internalize the blame. What did I do wrong? Was I too much?
The single most crucial step in healing is a cognitive shift. It's recognizing that the lack of communication, the inconsistency, the outright cruelty of these behaviors reflects the ghoster's lack of emotional maturity and communication skills, not the recipient's worth or value. The silence or the sporadic crumb is an answer. It's a demonstration of poor character revealed early.
That reframing transforms the experience. Instead of feeling rejected, you realize you have effectively dodged a bullet. You've had this person's inability to show basic respect revealed before you invested any more time or emotional capital.
It's a fundamental test.
And if the person immediately pushes back, or demands justification, or tries to negotiate.
That's step 2. Reiterate the point gently if pressed, but do not justify or argue. You might say something like, I understand this might be disappointing, but my mind is made up. We're simply not the right fit. This reinforces the boundary without opening a debate about your personal reasons, which, frankly, you do not owe them.
And the final, critical step, the boundary setting aspect that distinguishes this from ghosting.
Step 3. Cease contact if the recipient refuses to accept the boundary. If they continue to disregard your clear statement, or they become aggressive, or they persist in communicating despite your closure, you are now setting a firm boundary to protect yourself. You provided the explanation. If they violate that, the ensuing silence is an act of self-protection, not immaturity.
That distinction is paramount. Ghosting is choosing silence instead of communication. This is choosing silence after clear communication has been rejected. The difference between being immature and being protective.
Integrity means owning your decisions, even the uncomfortable ones.
For those who have been deeply impacted by these cycles, particularly breadcrumbing or trauma bonds, simply changing your perspective isn't enough. The sources highlighted Dr. Marty Foreman's practical framework for recovery. Get smart. We need to detail this, moving beyond just a list and into actionable steps.
The Get Smart method provides an 8-step roadmap for dismantling these emotionally exhausting cycles and restoring self-worth.
Okay, let's start with G and E.
G is for goal orientation. This means redirecting the energy you previously spent obsessing over the breadcrumber or the lost relationship and focusing it intensely on personal goals.
So that could be training for a marathon, launching a professional project, learning a new skill.
Something completely independent of the person who hurt you. And E is for emotion management. Toxic relationships cause intense, confusing feelings. This step involves learning to name and regulate them. Instead of just feeling bad, you identify. This is anxiety related to potential abandonment, or this is grief over a false promise.
Naming the emotion helps drain its power.
It does. It allows you to use techniques like focused breathing or other skills to stabilize your nervous system.
Next up, T for thought restructuring, which directly addresses that painful self-blame.
T is for thought restructuring. This is actively challenging and replacing the cognitive distortions we discussed. So when the thought arises, I wasn't good enough, that's why they disappeared, you have to deliberately restructure it to a compassionate and accurate statement like, their inability to maintain consistent contact is a reflection of their own avoidance, not my worth.
Can you give us another example of that restructuring?
If you find yourself obsessing over the possibility they might return, that romantic detective mode, you reframe it. I am choosing consistency and safety for myself. I am walking away from chaos because I deserve peace. You have to replace the belief that you are responsible for earning their affection with the certainty that you deserve a baseline level of respect.
Okay, moving into the SMART portion of the framework, starting with S&M.
S is for self-soothing. This involves developing reliable, healthy techniques to calm your nervous system when you're triggered. These are often sensory, weighted blankets, aromatherapy, specific music, or focused physical activity. This is vital for managing the chronic stress induced by intermittent reinforcement.
And M for mindfulness.
M is for mindfulness. Staying present is key to breaking rumination. When your mind starts replaying interactions or imagining future scenarios, mindfulness helps you anchor back to the current moment. It allows you to observe emotional triggers without impulsively acting on them, like resisting the urge to check the breadcrumber's social media.
A addresses the root causes.
A is for attachment-style reflection. This is the introspection required to understand why you might be drawn to unavailable partners or why the chaos of the love bombing and breadcrumbing cycle felt familiar. This reflection helps identify whether you are habitually chasing the high of earning love.
And this often requires engaging with professional therapy or counseling.
It often does. Then R is for reaching out. Utilize your support systems, friends, family, a therapist, as an alternative to unhealthy coping mechanisms like isolating yourself or seeking comfort from the person who caused the pain. Support systems provide consistent validation and reality checks, which counter the confusion created by the manipulator.
And the final piece, T, for transformed behavior. This is where the rubber meets the road.
T is for transformed behavior. This means setting and enforcing hard boundaries. It's the practical implementation of change. For example, if a breadcrumber reappears, transformed behavior is immediately blocking them or responding once with clarity and then never again. It means walking away when inconsistency or disrespect is detected, rather than chasing.
Let's detail that transformed behavior regarding love bombing. How do you deter someone who is trying to fast-track intimacy?
The key strategy is maintaining a steady, realistic pace. Love bombers are impatient. Their tactic relies on overwhelming you quickly. Slowing down the relationship serves as a natural deterrent. Insist on taking weeks, not days, to discuss future plans. If the relationship doesn't move at their dictated explosive speed, a manipulator will often find the effort unsustainable and just bail quickly.
And we discussed testing the boundaries early on. What does that look like in practice against a potential manipulator?
It's simple but incredibly revealing. Early in dating, try saying a non-critical no to a request or ask to slow down the pace physically or emotionally and just observe their reaction. A healthy partner will respect your boundary, express understanding, and adjust.
Whereas a manipulator will display immediate defensiveness or dismissiveness or attempt to override the boundary.
And that test reveals their character before you are emotionally invested.
What about breadcrumbing specifically? If someone is sporadically texting you, how does transformed behavior apply?
The power dynamic in breadcrumbing relies entirely on your continued engagement. You have two options, but both prioritize your peace. The first is to walk away immediately and block. The second, if you require clarity for yourself, is to directly call out the inconsistent behavior, not confrontationally, but clearly.
Using an I statement.
Yes. I notice our communication is very sporadic, and I'm looking for a connection with more consistency. If that's not possible, I need to move on.
And if they waffle or gaslight you or the pattern just persists after that statement, the choice becomes clear.
The best course of action is to walk away and limit your responses. Transformed behavior means realizing you deserve a clear, consistent connection and refusing to be drawn back into the game of intermittent reinforcement. You refuse the crumbs because you know you deserve a full meal.
The ultimate goal, through all these strategies, is moving away from the internal need to earn love or acceptance and demanding a non-negotiable baseline of respect and clarity in all your relationships. This deep dive into the new language of digital instability has been powerful. We've analyzed the shift in dating culture, established a nuanced lexicon for these behaviors, and grounded our understanding in some really hard scientific data.
And the biggest revelation, stemming from that Navarro study, really challenged our expectation that abrupt ghosting is the most damaging tactic. While it's painful, ghosting provides a finality that allows for recovery. The psychological chaos created by the intermittent, hopeful uncertainty of breadcrumbing, however, often causes deeper, more prolonged emotional damage.
So ghosting is a sharp, finite wound. But breadcrumbing is a chronic, low-grade infection that hooks into the brain's primal addiction pathways by exploiting the power of unpredictable rewards.
And it keeps the victim obsessively locked in a cycle of rumination, chasing a validation that leads to demonstrably worse satisfaction with life, helplessness, and loneliness.
Understanding these patterns, from the controlling idealism of love bombing to the calculated avoidance of breadcrumbing, is not just academic, it's an essential tool for self-preservation in the modern world.
It is. You must recognize that true connection requires consistency, vulnerability, and mutual effort, not chaos, inconsistency, or intensity used as a substitute for depth.
The lesson here is clear. You have the right to prioritize your peace and to define what safety looks like in your relationships.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. If you consistently find yourself attracted to high-intensity, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable partners, it may be time to ask what the familiarity of that chaos is signaling to your system. True relational growth isn't just about identifying the toxic behaviors of others. It's about setting a firm, non-negotiable boundary that ensures you accept nothing less than authentic, consistent connection. Define safety and then choose it.